Like I said, this is a chapter that probably everybody's familiar with because of the content, and typically, around Easter time, we start looking at some of the text within this particular chapter. One thing that was interesting, we're going to continue to see contrasts, and when we looked at chapter 18, we saw some contrast. We saw a contrast between the mean judge, for lack of a better word, and we talked about how some people will equate God to that judge, but that judge is the opposite of who God is. God being a loving father, and the judge was being just sort of this unrighteous person who was self-absorbed and gave that woman who was persistent in prayer what she wanted simply because he wanted to rid her from his life. And so we're going to continue to see some contrast here. And, we also saw contrast from a man who's admired by everybody, who couldn't find salvation, and one who is despised by everybody who does find salvation. And so that's sort of what we're going to look at in this first section.
Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. A man was there by the name of Zacchaeus. He was chief tax collector and was wealthy. He wanted to see who Jesus was, but being a short man, he could not because of the crowd. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore tree to see him, since Jesus was coming that way. When Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today. So he came down at once and come and welcomed him gladly. All the people saw this and began to mutter, he has gone to be with the guest of a sinner. But Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor. And if I have cheated anyone out of anything, I will pay back 4 times that amount. Jesus said to him, today salvation has come to this house, because this man too is the son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and save what was lost.
So you'll remember when we talked in the last chapter about the rich young ruler, how the rich young ruler is a person in that culture in that day who was looked upon as a role model. He was admired by people, and obviously he had a lot of money, he had a lot of stuff, and so because of the way the thought process was for people in that day, and certainly in the Jewish mindset, was, well, if you got a lot of good things and your life is going well, you must be in good graces with God. And so we're going to see that contrast, because that individual, even though from the world's perspective he looked like he had the world by the tail, he was lost. This time we're going to see a person who's the contrast of that, who is despised by everybody, who's not only a tax collector, and we all know that tax collectors were people that were conscripted, if you will, by the Roman government to go out and collect taxes. And so you had Jews taking money from their own people, exploiting them. And this particular person, Zacchaeus, wasn't just one of those, but he was the head, if you will, tax collector. He was the chief tax collector. And so not only was he exploiting his people, he had people under him who were exploiting their own people. And so it's interesting that when you look at this, here you have this person who is despised by everybody, who ultimately in the end becomes a believer and becomes part of the kingdom and becomes an obedient follower of Christ. And it is just odd to us when we look at that, because he has so many non-redeeming qualities, that it's hard to get our minds wrapped around the fact that, well, he can be a child of God and he can be in God's good graces. But that is very much, fortunately for us, the case. Those people who desire to see Christ, um, um, they will ultimately get through the opposition, and they will do extraordinary things to get to where Christ is. What comes to mind is the woman who had the issue of blood. She had gone to all the doctors. She had tried for years to fix her issue. She was looked down upon by those in her community, but she was so overwhelmed and in such need and wanting to get to Christ so badly that she pushed through the crowds. The blind man that we talked to on the side of the road, who hears that Jesus is coming through the town, and Jesus's handlers try to quiet him. He gets louder in order to get to Jesus, and again he finds success. And so I think that anybody, even in our day to day, in our culture today, if somebody is at that place where they are so desirous of coming to know Christ, to see if he's real, if they will push through and they will reach out to him, Christ guarantees that he will reach out to us. And so wherever we find Christ, and wherever we find an open heart of somebody, regardless of their past, regardless of their situation, salvation is achievable. We see that with Zacchaeus, where Zacchaeus is hiding in the, not hiding, but he's up in the tree so he can see. Jesus says to him, not Zacchaeus, can I come to your house? He says, Zacchaeus, I must come to your house. And so Jesus knows the condition of this man. When the two meet, finally, salvation is achieved for Zacchaeus. We know Zacchaeus is saved because of the transformation that takes place within Zacchaeus's life. Now, in this particular case, we see that Zacchaeus's behavior begins to transform. The law of the day and the law of the land was, when you wronged somebody, you would have to give back like 1.5 times what you took from somebody, or the damage that you did to somebody. This case, Zacchaeus, he could have gotten by with just giving back 1.5 times of what he extorted from people, but he goes way beyond that, giving much more back to the people. And so that too, again, would have been seen by people in his community. They would have recognized, hey, he's not only doing the least amount, he's going way beyond. Something has happened to this guy. Something is different about Zacchaeus. And so that too can be realized in our own lives, and it should be realized in the lives of the people that surround us. When we get saved, or as we walk out our faith day to day, people should look to us and think, wow, why are they going above and beyond? Why are they doing so much more than the world requires of them? Well, if we're in a relationship with Christ, that should be our desire, to have an impact on people by going above and beyond. And so now we see, after this encounter with Zacchaeus, Jesus and his entourage are heading towards Jerusalem. And many people would believe at that point that, they've been on this journey for a while with Jesus, for a few years. Now they're getting closer to the ultimate goal, and they believe that the ultimate goal is that Jesus is the Messiah they've been waiting for, the King, and he's on his way to Jerusalem to set up his kingdom. And so everything is going to change dramatically for them, so they think. And because they're so attuned to Jesus at this point, he tells them a parable of the minas. And just to give you an idea, a mina is about 3 months worth of wages for an individual.
As they were listening to this, he went on to tell a parable as he was near Jerusalem, and they thought the kingdom of God was going to appear right away. Therefore, he said, an old man traveled to a far country to receive for himself authority to a king and then return. He called 10 of his slaves, gave them 10 minas, and told them, engage in business until I come back. But his subjects hated him and went on a delegation after him, saying, we don't want this man to rule over us. At his return, having received the authority to be king, he he summoned those slaves he had given the money to, so he could find out how much they had made in business. The first came forward and said, Master, your mina has earned 10 more minas. Well done, good slave, he told him, because you have been faithful in a very small matter, have authority over 10 towns. The second came and said, Master, your mina has made 5 minas. So he said to him, you will be 5 towns. And another came and said, Master, here is your mina. I have kept it hidden away in a closet, because I was afraid of you, for you're a tough man. You collect what you did deposit and reap what you didn't sow. He told them, I will judge you by what you have said, you evil slave. You are a tough man, collecting what I didn't deposit and reaping what I didn't sow. Why didn't you put my money in the bank? And when I returned, I would have collected it with interest. So he said to those standing there, take the mina away from him and give it to the one who has 10 minas. But they said to him, Master, he has 10 minas. I tell you that to everyone who has more will be given, and from the one who does not have, even what he does have will be taken away. But bring here these enemies of mine who did not want me to rule over them and slaughter them in my presence.
So when we read this, it sounds familiar, and a lot of people equate this particular parable to the parable that we see in Matthew 25, the parable of the talents. It's not the same, and it kind of follows the same theme somewhat, but it's different. That you'll remember that in the parable of the talents, different amounts are given to the servants, whereas in this one, and there was only 3 in that one, in this one there's 10, and they're all given the same amount. It's not divided up unequally. And so in that first one, in the Gospel of Matthew, it's talking about gifts and leveraging our gifts and using what it is that we have available to us to grow the kingdom or to be a benefit to the kingdom. In this particular story, it's about being tested and about whether or not you're going to be willing to leverage or take advantage of the expectation that God has given you, the things that he's given you as part of the kingdom as a believer. You know, are you going to take the gospel and use it to its fullest? And so we only hear the results of 3 people. We don't hear the results of all 10. And we don't need to hear the results of all 10 because the 3 give us enough information to understand what Jesus is saying. Those people who took that money and invested it and did the things to grow it, they are rewarded. They're given more responsibility. Now, an interesting thing here is that they don't get to retire. They don't get to just say, okay, I did a good thing. I invested properly, and now I can kind of sit back and take it easy. The expectation increases. Jesus is saying those people took what I gave them. They're part of the kingdom. They've grown the kingdom. They've invested in the kingdom. And so now I'm going to give them more responsibility so that they can grow the kingdom even larger and impact other people and influence other people. The one that didn't do what was expected, didn't attempt to leverage what he had to carry out the responsibility of growing the kingdom, everything's taken away from that person and given to those that have more already. And then we see that there's this harsh punishment. In the very end, Sherry read, those people that didn't support the king were brought before the king and they were executed. And the same thing is true for us as believers. Those people who are non-believers, who aren't disciples of Christ, at the end of the day, they're going to come before the king and they're in essence going to be executed because they haven't bought into the kingdom of God. They haven't bought into being a believer. They haven't bought into accepting who who Jesus is. And so that is going to end poorly for them. They're going to be separated from God for all eternity. And so the journey continues. You know, Jesus has their attention when he tells them this story of the minas, and now they're moving closer to Jerusalem.
After Jesus had said this, he went on ahead, going up to Jerusalem. As he approached Bethphage and Bethany at the hill called the Mount of Olives, he sent two of his disciples, saying to them, "Go to the village ahead of you, and as you enter it, you will find a colt tied there, which no one has ever ridden. Untie it and bring it here. If anyone asks you, 'Why are you untying it?' say, 'The Lord needs it.'" Those who were sent ahead went and found it just as he had told them. As they were untying the colt, its owners asked them, "Why are you untying the colt?" They replied, "The Lord needs it." They brought it to Jesus, threw their cloaks on the colt, and put Jesus on it. As he went along, people spread their cloaks on the road. When he came near the place where the road goes down to Mount of Olives, the whole crowd of disciples began joyfully to praise God in loud voices for all the miracles they had seen. "Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord. Peace in heaven and glory in the highest." Some of the Pharisees in the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, rebuke your disciples." "I tell you," he replied, "if they keep quiet, the stones will cry out." As he approached Jerusalem and saw the city, he wept over it and said, "If you, even you, had only known on this day what would bring you peace, but now it is hidden from your eyes. The days will come upon you when your enemies will build an embankment against you and encircle you and hem you in on every side. They will dash you to the ground, you and the children within your walls. They will not leave one stone on another, because you did not recognize the time of God's coming to you."
It's important that we have some understanding of the context here. Again, it's been a long time coming where people believe that Jesus is the Messiah they've been looking for. They have an earthly understanding of what their Messiah is going to look like. So they believe, as they're journeying towards Jerusalem, that the time has come that this person, Jesus, is the earthly king. He's going to go in and he's going to disrupt everything, and life is going to begin to get a lot better for the Jews. Now, obviously, we know that their understanding was different, but you have to know that this is a very precarious time. Even though people are starting to get behind him, there's enthusiasm that's growing, the crowds are growing, people cannot wait for this extraordinary event of the overthrowing of the government, the Roman government, and so everybody's on board. But it's a very volatile time, because potentially they are going up against the most powerful nation in the world, the Romans, the Roman government. And so everybody who's associated with Jesus, not just Jesus, but everybody associated with him, could be put to death. And yet they're all excited. They're moving towards what they believe is this ultimate outcome. Now, the only one in this whole thing who really understands what's happening is Jesus himself. And so you see this extraordinary courage. Jesus knows that he's going into Jerusalem. He's coming down to the last days of his life. He's going to suffer this extraordinary death on the cross. And yet he pushes towards that. He continues to move in that direction. And despite what everybody else thinks and the excitement around him, Jesus knows that the majority of those people who are so excited are going to turn on him ultimately, and he's going to, as I said, go to the cross. Nevertheless, they're excited. They're praising him. They're singing and lauding his praises because they're excited. But not everybody's excited. You have the Pharisees who are kind of over watching this, and they do not believe that Jesus is the Messiah. They believe that he needs to be eliminated and executed. And they're also concerned because they understand very well that if the people have their way, because of their excitement surrounding Jesus, this could rub the Roman government and in particular Pilate the wrong way, and he would impose his forces on the people across the board, all the Jews, and suppress what is taking place, and there would be a high price to pay for that. So they're not on board with this, and they want to stop this. Keep in mind, they've been trying to find a way to trip Jesus up for a long time. They've been looking for a way to kill him, and now things are getting more serious, and so they don't know what to do. They tell Jesus and the disciples, look, this needs to stop. They rebuke him, and Jesus makes this comment that, well, if these people keep quiet, the stones are going to cry out. And so what he means by that is not necessarily that the stones are going to literally cry out. What he's saying is that God has put a plan into motion, and there is no stopping this plan that God has set since the beginning of time. It is going to come to fruition. The Pharisees are not going to win in the end. They're not going to be able to stop Jesus. They're not going to derail the plan of God.
When Jesus entered the temple courts, he began to drive out those who were selling. It is written, he said to them, my house will be a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of robbers. Every day he was teaching at the temple, but the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the leaders among the people were trying to kill him, yet could not find any way to do it because all the people hung on his words.
You may remember that this John talks about an incident where Jesus goes into the temple as well, and he kind of riles things up. Some people believe that the account in John and the other Gospels is the same thing. I don't think that that's the case. I think there was probably two separate incidents. The one that John talks about is at the beginning of Jesus's ministry, and the one that Luke talks about, the other Gospels refer to, is later at this point as he's going into the last days of his life. And so things are ratcheting up. Jesus has made this extraordinary entry into Jerusalem with his disciples. There are multitudes of people that are believing that Jesus is this long-awaited king. The religious leaders are growing in their anger. People are hanging on every word that Jesus is having to say, and so there has to be a way for these leaders to eliminate Jesus and to stop this trend that is taking place. Jesus goes into the temple because this is a place where people went to when they taught. You'll recall that when we look at the book of Acts, the people went into Solomon's colonnade as part of the temple. That was sort of the gathering place, and that's where you could go and find the crowds, and you could teach and do those things. And so that's where Jesus is going. Jesus is dismayed because people have turned this place of God into this marketplace that is being used for their own purposes. And so you have people that are taking religious things, taking the things of God, exploiting them for their own financial gain. Something that we see today even. It's big money. There's millions and billions of dollars that are tied up into religious things, whether they're books or movies or tapes or singing or churches or so many things. Not all of them are bad, but many of them are being used, or they're exploiting genuine believers in order to make their own financial gains. And so it's not something that was restricted to the first century. It's something that continues on today. And Jesus reprimands them for doing that. He's still not happy about it being done today. And as we get closer to the end times, we're going to see those people that are benefiting or gaining financially from exploiting Christianity. You won't see that anymore, because those people or people in general who are believers, they're going to be persecuted. They're going to be put to death. It's going to become hard to be a Christian. And so that stream of income for people is going away. And those people who aren't genuine followers of Christ aren't going to put their life in jeopardy for money.